Hello, my name is Dr. Laura Basha, and it is November 2020. And I was in a conversation this past weekend with a number of elders, people who are 65 years or older. It was a global conversation, people from many different countries engaged in this inquiry of what does it mean to become an elder. And one of the topics that came up for conversation, inquiry, questioning, pondering, struggling with was the issue of loneliness. Particularly during this pandemic time, people are dealing with being alone and not having the opportunities for escaping from being alone that we normally would have. We don't typically, particularly this age group, isn't particularly going out to restaurants, going out to lunch, being able to move around as much as we usually can. So we are more confined. And for those of us who are in this time of life, we are so in love with our grandchildren. And there's a endless dialogue in your head about how safe is it? Can you see them? Even if they're close, is it close by, physically close by? Is it smart to visit them? What about the holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas and all the other holidays that we celebrate in different cultures? Usually families come together. And many of us are not doing that this year because it doesn't feel like the wisest choice in terms of taking care of ourselves. Again, particularly as we get older. The immune system, there's not as much of a robustness in the body as the body ages. So loneliness has often been an issue for many of us, not just as we get older, but all through life. And so particularly if that's been an experience that we've been dealing with, it's exacerbated now with the conditions that the world is in. Now, I'm someone who's been suffering, I would say, with loneliness since I was a child. My family circumstances were such that for all my sisters and myself, the not feeling safe, not feeling cared about, not feeling like there really was someone to talk to, that's just how our childhood went. And so for me, throughout my life, I have struggled with dealing with loneliness. Not so much being alone. I don't mind being alone. I'm a very creative person and I actually enjoy being alone because the creative process is a sacred process and it's more available to me without interruption and without the distraction of other people. But loneliness is a different animal. And so being a psychologist, being someone who's been called to spirituality, metaphysics, since I was very young. And being an artist, there's a listening for what I don't know or what I don't understand. And what struck me this weekend in the conversation with people who have been very successful in their lives, people who are not struggling with the material things, people who have been engaged in growth and development since they were young, are still confronted with loneliness. Many of us really are living alone day in and day out. I'm fortunate in that I'm married, so I do have my husband here. Many people, one sister in particular, several of my friends, don't have anyone else. So it's more confronting even when you don't even have someone to, get a hug from or even be annoyed with. Even that's a kind of engagement that alleviates and distracts you from loneliness. Even so, I have suffered and struggled, and I have, suffered with loneliness. And I finally got to the place where I thought, I wonder if I can break through this. I wonder if there's an access to something else. If instead of resisting feeling lonely, trying to fix feeling lonely, if I actually somehow could embrace it, since I deal with it, is there some way that I can integrate it into my life instead of suffering? Now, I meditate. And meditation for me does remind me of who I am eternally, who I am larger than Laura Basha, who I am larger than this woman that lives in California, who has children, who has grandchildren, who, wonders about should she let her hair go gray, what was the latest thing on politics, who am I eternally? And when I tap into that quietness, that internal realm of silence, all of the content of that thinking disappears. And I do experience the eternal, energetic, peaceful, harmonious sense of self that does have me connected with a kind of oneness of humanity. Often we feel that when we go into nature, because nature is always connected to the eternal. Sometimes if we have animals and pets and we look into their eyes, the reason we love them so much is they are just completely present. And when you're completely present, love is present. So it occurred to me, a little bit late in the game, but it occurred to me, what if I brought this wondering about loneliness into this experience of the eternal, this quietness of meditation? So I started to do that. And what I was able to begin to distinguish is the suffering that happens from loneliness. That the loneliness is a feeling that actually emerges out of what I make loneliness mean. The monologue I have in my head about loneliness. And what I started to see was pretty clearly, well, if I'm feeling lonely, that means nobody cares about me. That means I'll be alone, maybe forever. That means remembering feeling abandoned as a child. All of these thoughts about what loneliness means. So as I stayed in this kind of thoughtful, quiet, meditative state of mind, if you will, the thought occurred to me, well, what if I were to fall in love with loneliness? Like, what if I, instead of suffering and resisting this experience, I embraced it and fell in love with it? Well, it wasn't instantaneous. It happened over a process of continuing to reflect on this. But what started to happen as I kept thinking in that direction is the feeling of loneliness, the sadness, the grief, the loss and victim and vulnerability of not being cared about started to lift. The feeling, as I stopped focusing on those thoughts, the feeling of loneliness started to shift. And what finally occurred was an emergence of love. Just sitting in this room, an emergence of love, an emergence of freedom, an emergence of well-being, like nothing was wrong, like the world of loneliness dissipated. And what I saw was allowing myself to embrace and fall in love with the feeling of loneliness became a portal to the experience of love and the experience of belonging and the disappearance of the experience of loneliness. Now, that's not personal. It's not like I have this portal that gets me into love. We all have access to this portal to love. We are actually kind of hardwired to have access to that portal. We just don't tap into that kind of listening. Like, am I listening for the suffering of loneliness? Or am I listening for the possibility of love? Through letting go of everything I make loneliness mean, and maybe experiencing the suffering of loneliness as a longing for the eternal, as a longing for the experience of love. It's almost as if the pain of suffering from loneliness became so deep that it pulled me in so deeply that it occurred to me that I didn't want to be living there, and that there was another direction that it could take me. So I leave you with that, with the possibility that whatever we're suffering with, this is very pragmatic, by the way. This took some doing. I had to deal with my humanity and my thinking. It was real for me. I suffered a long time with this. And now I sort of can't dupe myself with this sad story anymore, because now it's like, well, how willing am I to give up suffering and remember that the oneness, the eternality of love and well-being is always available. It's just waiting for me to put my attention towards it. We're looking at each other through it. It penetrates, interpenetrates, saturates, and permeates every aspect of our life experience. And yet it's our attention to the things that bother us that keep us from experiencing it. So I'll just say this in closing. It's not that life doesn't still throw curves. Life isn't still challenging, because life experience is challenging. It's life on the planet is even dangerous. I mean, honestly, if you've lived any length of time, you know that there's challenges to be alive. But to be able to see that you can be serious without feeling serious, that you can be alone without feeling lonely, that you can actually feel more connected by shifting your attention from the things that you experience as suffering to a listening for the eternal. Don't take my word for it. Give it a shot in the laboratory of your life. I wish you a wonderful holiday season. I'll probably do at least one more video before the year is out. But I wish you well. I wish you safety and health. And thank you so much for tuning in.